I'm not going to be doing much moderating this evening, my brothers, but actually just listening. I'm a baseball fan, and I'm a fan of our speaker this evening, Brother Nate. I want to thank you for being here this evening. I hope that you and your family are healthy and well during these difficult and challenging times. I want to really get right to the program, but I do want to just give some announcements for additional and future programs that Craftsmen Online we're putting on. And once again, what is Craftsmen Online? People have heard me say that all the time. It's just literally brothers from New York State trying to share our stories, your stories, and our history of our brothers, our history of our lodges, of our districts, and of our grand jurisdiction, and just celebrate Freemasonry. We're also trying to just get education out there. We've been doing some wonderful buildings and lodges programs, trying to address many of the challenges that lodges, especially lodge owners, continue to face. Some upcoming programs, we have a very special program on April 7th, where we have the director of the Robert R. Livingston Masonic Library, as well as our two history co-editors, our speaker tonight, Brother Nate, as well as worshipful brother Ron Seafried, DSA, who will be talking about the basics that lodges should be doing to preserve their own artifacts. Every lodge, I don't care if your lodge was formed yesterday, you have artifacts that you want to preserve forever. Paper artifacts, paintings, jewels. There's a basic understanding that lodges really must follow and protocols that must follow in order to make sure that you're not washing away our history. So please join us on April 7th for a special Zoom program on the basics that lodges should do to preserve their lodges artifacts. On April 25th, we have another reading room, which is a book discussion. And if you go to our website, you can see the course material. Everything is open source. You can download the material. On April 28th, I'm very proud to introduce the second in our three-part series with Right Worshipful Brother Marino Cesarini from the Queens Masonic District, who's a past Grand Treasurer and has been literally teaching our district deputy and staff officers for nearly 30 years. And I'll be frank, my brothers, I would love to see our capacity, our Zoom capacity, filled up. There's no reason why any younger brother, incoming worshipful master, would not want to hear what this brother who teaches, at district deputies and staff officers should be hearing. In fact, on April 28th, the program will be Masonic law in your lodge, the basics that really your lodges should know and how to function properly. My brothers, I want to thank you once again for being here. Without further ado, let me introduce Brother Nate Tweedie and his wonderful program on Masonry and baseball. It's all yours, brother.
Just a little quick heads up here. So this program is open to both Masons and non-Masons alike. So there might be some things that you think I'm being a little too cautious about, or things that I may be going a little too much detail on that every Mason should know. Just know it's intended for both Masons and non-Masons alike. The presentation this evening is called The Craft in the Clubhouse, a comparative study of American Freemasonry and the national game. So I am the current junior warden of Delaware River Lodge number 439 in Delhi, New York, and the current senior deacon at Otsego Lodge number 138 in Cooperstown. So let's jump right into it. So right here, you can see the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum. That is located at 25 Main Street in Cooperstown. All right, most people are familiar with the Hall of Fame. Most people know it as the Mecca for baseball, or baseball's hometown. Has a lot of different terminology for it, but that is the museum right there, right on the main street. A little bit further up the street is Doubleday Field, one of the oldest ballparks in the country. Interestingly, it's never actually held a major league or minor league team. Has had a couple of collegiate woodbat and other semi-pro style teams, but never actually a minor or major league team made that their home stadium. Talk a little bit more about Doubleday Field here in a bit. And right between those two, at 77 Main Street is my mother lodge. It's Otsego Lodge number 138, the Masonic Temple, right on the intersection. For those of you who've been to Cooperstown, there's a giant flag right in the middle of Main Street. And when I say in the middle, I mean it's in the middle. It works like a roundabout. And we're right on that intersection. That's where you can find Otsego Lodge. So real quick for the night. So an operative Mason and a speculative Mason or a Freemason, just need to kind of define these two terms. So an operative Mason is a person who works with stones and uses them in the construction of buildings, walls, or other structures. And then speculative or a Freemason, a person who uses the symbols of operative Masonry and shall to make themselves and their community a more perfect ashlar. And obviously there's some broad terminology in there, like what is community, but that's it. So anyway, I'm going to throw this up here so you can start looking at some names. This is half the list I want to let you know. So I worked at the Baseball Hall of Fame for 4.5 years. During my time there, I was responsible for working with schools coming on field trips, developing curriculums, and doing research to see what we could tie in from the museum's collection in with educational programming. And while I was there, going through the folders, because there's a player folder for every single player who's ever recorded a single out defensively at the major league level or recorded an at bat at the major league level. So as long as you've done one of those two, you should have a folder at the Hall of Fame. As I was going through those folders, there's also subject folders. And one of those subject folders just happened to be two different words, free and Mason. Obviously, Freemason is one word, so I fixed that on the labeling system and found some interesting stuff in there, mainly Masonic baseball leagues and their scores. Also, a few other baseball related items, but what really caught my attention was a list that I'm sure some of you have seen by Brother Jerry Erickson out of California. Now, Brother Erickson's big hobby was trying to find anyone and everyone involved with baseball. And it's been published in several forms over the years, with the numbers ranging from 300, I think is the lowest I've seen, up to over 600 Masons involved in baseball. Now, this isn't just baseball players, it's executives, umpires, scouts, broadcasters, newspaper writers, pretty much anyone involved at the major league level. So that list, while quite impressive, the number is not as big as some people might think it is, given how broad that net was cast. And based on that, and then also speaking with Ray Worshipful Cohen, who First Manhattan, if I'm not mistaken, right, Carrie? So, yep, shaking his head, yes. So, so another New York Mason here, helping me out with working on our numbers, and then my own research brought in a few additional on top of Brother Erickson and Brother Cohen's works. And then just last week, I was giving this presentation to a Lodge of Instruction in Massachusetts, and I found another one of the members of their district, who's a Hall of Famer, and actually he's one of the first ones on our next slide here, Brother Billy Hamilton, actually worshipful Brother Billy Hamilton, I should say, and he's from the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts. So as I was going through, I kept finding more and more and more Freemasons. I found 62 total Freemasons that were inducted into the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum. That seems pretty high, but how high is that? What percentage is that? Turns out it's actually currently 18.6% of the 333 electees to the Hall of Fame. I say electees because the class of 2020 still hasn't actually been inducted. They are still only electees. So pretty impressive that of the 333, just over 18.5% are Masons. And this got me wondering, why is this number, or why is this percentage so high? Keep in mind, if you look at the MSA's records for Masonic numbers, it peaked right around 1960. I believe 1961 was the peak year for Masonic membership in the United States, and started to go down after that. At no point in their records was anywhere near 18% of the population. So why were there so many Masons that are in the Hall of Fame? There's some pretty simple answers and some a little bit more complex answers possibly, but it's really tied in with what I was seeing elsewhere. When I joined Masonry, like I said, I was working at the Hall of Fame and I doing all sorts of research, and I'm reading Freemasonry for Dummies, which, by the way, great book for any new Mason. It really is. It's actually for the New York Masons in the room. It's actually in, I think, volume 1 of the Grand Lodge's, or the library's reading program. So yeah, it's great for beginners. And I kept, as I was reading the history of Masonry and looking at the symbolism, I kept finding connections back to baseball. So finding this information with what I already kind of knew, it just seemed like a natural fit that there had to be something more to it. So let's talk a little bit about those connections. But first, there are other Masons that aren't Hall of Famers that are quite famous themselves. Charles Ebbets, of Ebbets Field name. Charlie Finley, also a Freemason, also 32nd degree Scottish Rite Mason as well. Southern jurisdiction, not Northern Masonic. And then Stephen C. Clark, a name not so many baseball fans may recognize. He was a member of Otsego Lodge 138 in Cooperstown, but he was a worshipful brother from New York City. I forget which lodge he was in New York City. And he was actually the founder of the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum. So even the guy who founded the Hall of Fame is a Mason. But also these two guys, a lot of people like to say are in the Hall of Fame. They're not. Their video is playing constantly. Actually, I could hear it from my desk playing on a loop nonstop. I can repeat it to you word for word if you'd like. But who's on first is constantly playing. So Abbott and Costello there. But this guy, Mr. Oh geez, that's Bud Costello, right? Yeah, so he's also a brother Freemason. So why are we all these connections everywhere coming back to Freemasonry? Right? The obvious answer is it has to be a conspiracy, right? Has to absolutely be a conspiracy. Masons trying to take over baseball. And look, if we take the square and compasses and overlay it over top of the baseball field, I mean, that's all the proof you need. Expand the compasses out a little bit, and we've got proof, right? But let's take it a step further. If we flip the square and compasses upside down, kind of looks like a goat's head there. There's proof of Baphomet, and there's all the proof we need. Freemasons and the occult, and here's everything we need to know. Proof of conspiracy. All right, obviously everything I'm saying here is tongue-in-cheek, I hope you realize, because no, there's no Masonic conspiracy, but that doesn't stop people from thinking so. This video actually no longer is on YouTube, which I have mixed feelings about, because one, I don't want wrong information going out there, but two, it is absolutely fantastic to listen to the stretches people make. The Abner Doubleday, the Freemason that invented baseball, the occult of the diamond. It sounds kind of terrifying. But yeah, not really true. Let's dive into that a little bit further. Let's play two lies and a truth. I know it's normally two truths and a lie. Now, I used to teach, so I like some interaction. So use your chat function, and I actually want to hear here. Type in, please, which one of these is true about Abner Doubleday. Type it in the chat you got there. So which one's true? We got one person answering. Give me a couple more. Oh, you guys are killing me here with your giving the same answer. Oh, there we go. Little mix up here. Thank you. All right. So, all right, we have all three answers that have come out now. That's great. Thank you. All right. So let's see which one of these is true. Which one of these is wrong? So he is not the inventor of baseball. Sorry. And actually, there's zero proof that there's actually a connection between him and baseball at any point in his life. So he's many things, but not the inventor of baseball. Also, I'm just going to ask you all check to make sure that you're muted. And he's not a Freemason. All right, so Abner Doubleday did live in Cooperstown for a short period. He did have family members in the area. Some of them were Masons, but as far as we can tell, there's zero connection making Abner Doubleday a Freemason. He was, in fact, a West Point graduate. And he actually was the Union officer that gave the order to return fire at Fort Sumter, which is pretty cool. Also pretty well known for his role at the Battle of Gettysburg. So he really was a very well-known military man from his period, and he also was definitely a West Point grad. We'll talk a little bit about why that's so important in just a second. So let's talk a little bit about the legendary origins of baseball. The Doubleday myth. Most people have heard that Abner Doubleday invented baseball. In fact, New York State Highway Department said that he did invent baseball. There's a sign saying so. However, that is horribly inaccurate. So according to the story, in June of 1839, Abner Doubleday and a group of boys played the very first game of baseball in Finney's Field in Cooperstown. Finney, by the way, we'll talk a little bit about him in a sec. Actually, I'll just jump right ahead. So Finney, by the way, is Elihu Finney. Actually, it's the son of Elihu Finney's Field, but he's the first worshipful master of my mother lodge, Otsego Lodge. So maybe there is a Masonic connection going back to this. I don't know. So the Finney's Field is now where Doubleday Field stands, named after the story. And then the video that I alluded to earlier also continues that. And like I said, most people have heard that Doubleday invented baseball, but the Hall of Fame teaches that baseball didn't really have a start date. I have had people ask me, well, the current rules, when do the current rules start? And if you really want to go by that, that would be tomorrow would be the invention of baseball as we know it, because tomorrow is the opening day of the 2021 season, and there are rule changes from 2020 and from 2019 There's updates every year. So if you really want to be technical of, well, the current rules, it's tomorrow. But baseball itself really did evolve, we think. So baseball is a stick and ball game. Stick and ball games have been around since the ancient Egyptians, right? We have proof that they played stick and ball games. I'm not saying the ancient Egyptians played baseball, but the idea of picking up a rock and hitting it with a stick is not too complex. But baseball definitely evolved. On the left, you see a fairly famous lithograph of what is supposed to be the first baseball game played under the Knickerbocker set of rules, known as the Elysian Fields, is where the game was played. Today it's called Elysian Park. It's in Hoboken, New Jersey. And if you go to the Elysian Park, you will find little brass markers on the ground, approximately 90 feet apart from each other, marking the bases of where that first game was played. So that's the first baseball game, right? Well, I said the first game played by the Knickerbocker rules. So think of an athletic club, and that's really what early baseball was. These clubs would get together, they'd have their own rules. The home team usually provided the ball and picked the rules they played by. They were all fairly similar, but home field differences. And so that first set of rules, that first game played by those set of rules is depicted in the image on the left. Pretty well-known image. But that's really what we saw in New York, New Jersey, kind of the mid-Atlantic states. If you were to go up to New England at the time, you'd see a different game. Not the image depicted on the right, by the way, but you would definitely see a different game called town ball, also known as the New England game. And town ball would be played in a square, and instead of having bases, you'd run to pegs, and you could throw the ball to get somebody out, but very similar to what we'd know as baseball today. Enter the Civil War. We have men from all parts of the country coming together, and we see this new thing kind of come together. We have the New England game, we have the Knickerbocker set of rules and related types of rules kind of come together in the army camps, and what kind of gets spit out at the end of the war becomes what we more or less would call modern baseball. So if we just jump ahead a couple years, we see that we have the first professional baseball teams in 1869, right, with the Cincinnati Red Stockings and other teams. Actually, the Red Stockings aren't the only professional team in 1869. They are usually credited with being the first. But you'll notice the image on the right here. Some of you might be wondering what that game is. So I lived in Scotland for a short period, and while I was there, I worked with the Scouts. And every meeting that I went to ended with a game. And if the weather was good, we'd play this game called Rounders. And if anyone's ever played Rounders before, or if you haven't played Rounders and showed up at a game, you'd have the same reaction I did of, oh, this is baseball. And that's really what it is. You'll notice the field setup is just a little bit different, right? It's a diamond that the fourth side doesn't connect back to home plate or what would be home plate. It goes to a line extended from the batter's box. And you have to cross that line to score a run, similar to how cricket runs are scored. But it's definitely very different from cricket. Don't get me wrong, cricket definitely had its influence on what is baseball today. But I really think games like Rounders had a much stronger impact on creating what we know today as baseball than you'd find from cricket if you look at the rules. So baseball evolved. It was not invented. That doesn't mean there weren't people who were influential. Now, this is Alexander Cartwright. He is arguably the person most responsible for baseball as we know it today. Those of you who are baseball historians might know there's quite a bit of controversy that's come up over this claim in the last few years. He definitely was a member of the Knickerbocker Baseball Club, the one that set those rules, and he was their secretary, and he wrote that book. And has been credited with creating the shortstop position, with setting the base path at 90 feet. So those are two huge parts of what makes the game the game. And post-Civil War, he did move west. He started spreading baseball as he traveled. He went out to California in search of fortune, and getting out there realized it was kind of a bust as far as the gold mines and all that had gone. So he decided he's going to keep going on to Asia. So he hops on a boat and gets sick while traveling. The ship captain goes, yeah, you're sick. You're not continuing on to Asia with us. So leaves him stranded on an island they come to. Just happens to be, the big island in Hawaii. I can think of worse places to be stranded. But that's where he gets dropped off. He winds up recovering and stays in Hawaii. Yeah, so pretty cool that he did all that. So he is a Freemason. So maybe there is some sort of Masonic connection to the foundings of Freemasonry, right? Maybe there just is this inherent connection between the two. Well, the only problem with that is he became a Freemason while he was in Hawaii. So he'd already done all the baseball stuff, then he became a Mason. But what's really cool is Hawaii is one of the 2 jurisdictions I'm aware of here in the United States that don't use numbers for their lodges. Massachusetts doesn't, and Hawaii doesn't. However, he was not initiated by the Grand Lodge of Hawaii. They weren't a thing yet. He was initiated by the Grand Lodge of California, which was the Grand Lodge overseeing the Kingdom of Hawaii. So that's Brother Cartwright. And like I said, there's some controversy whether or not he is the father of modern baseball, but that quote is right below his name on the plaque you see there. So it is on his Hall of Fame plaque, so take that for what it is. Let's talk a little bit about the legendary origins of Freemasonry. Like I said, as I was reading about the history of Freemasonry, I keep finding connections to the history of baseball. I'm like, huh, this is fascinating. And so those of you familiar with Freemasonry history know we don't necessarily have the best history. Records on both sides, baseball and Masonic, aren't necessarily the best, which is something I'll talk about on the 7th. All right, so there's the Templar theory that on October 13th of 1307, Templars across France and Europe were arrested. Many Templars fled. Many went to Scotland, are believed to have gone to Scotland, where Robert Bruce was king at the time, and he was excommunicated by the Pope for stabbing a rival in a church, kind of a no-no. And so the enemy of my enemy is my friend, so they thought they'd find safe harbor. They then used modes of recognition to identify each other while they were on the lam, and these modes and initiation rituals developed eventually into Freemasonry. That's one theory. I'm going to throw out a few. None of these are proven, by the way, and none of them have been completely disproven either. So here we go, Box Club Charities theory. In the 15th century, a lot of trades had their own guilds. And if you were too small of a trade to have your own guild, you might join up with the other trades that were too small for a guild and form a box club charity. And these organizations provided relief to the members of the organization. If they were ill, if they'd passed away and the family needed support, anything that we'd expect from a mutual aid society. And there is evidence that these organizations would admit members from outside the associated trades. Well, it makes sense. If they don't really have a set code of you have to be from this, this, and this trade, and we bring in new trades, then it makes sense that if there's someone who's wealthy enough to contribute in, who's an individual merchant, that they could come in. And you could see how this could eventually lead to what becomes Freemasonry as well. The idea of aid, relief, those are central tenets to what we do as Freemasons. So, interesting theory. And then the operative transition theory. And this is that operative stonemasons met in lodges, and that that honorary members brought more symbolic meaning to the tools of craft masonry. And we see industrialism kind of bringing down the stoneworker's trade, because we start to see more modern style of work and construction. And then we see the Enlightenment bringing more men who have disposable income, who are curious about exploring more intellectual pursuits. And these two kind of merge into each other because the stonemasons need some additional support financially. These men are looking for some sort of organization, and they just kind of merge together and form eventually what we know today as Freemasonry. So all three of these are different theories that are out there as to how Masonic lodges and Freemasonry became a thing. Again, all theories, none of them proven. So what are the actual origins then of Freemasonry? Maybe. So I'm putting factual because even these facts are being debated. So the Grand Lodge of England, today known as the United Grand Lodge of England, but the Grand Lodge of England was created in 1717 at the Goose and Gridiron pub in England. It may have been actually in 1721, but who's to argue? Anyway, it happened at some point in around 1717. The ideals of Freemasonry lined up quite well with the ideals of the Enlightenment, and this caused the fraternal order to spread quite quickly. However, if you look to the north, up to Scotland, you find Kilwinning Lodge and other time immemorial lodges. And these both challenge and support this. And here's why I say it does both. One, it challenges it because Freemasonry could not have been created in 1717 if there's Freemason lodges before then. And that's what we have here. However, it also supports it because while these lodges existed as what we'd recognize as Freemasonry, there was no body to kind of unite them together. So it both accepts it and it both challenges it both. Because obviously there was Freemasonry before 1717. Proof of that comes from the Edinburgh Registry House. One of the earliest recorded Masonic rituals occurred there, or degrees as we'd know them. It was in the minutes of the Edinburgh Registry House in 1696, predating the Grand Lodge of England by about 21 years. So, real quick, both Freemasonry and baseball evolved. While we don't know exactly what sports evolved into baseball, we don't know exactly how Freemasonry came to be out of other organizations, we have some pretty solid theories. But what we do know is there's a point where what we recognize begins. For Freemasonry, it's 1717-ish. And for baseball, it's really post 1865. That is when baseball is baseball. Of course, there's room for debate on all of this, but more or less we can agree on this. So let's talk a little bit about the not so happy side of the shared history of these two organizations, organized baseball and Freemasonry. So post-Civil War professional baseball. This is a Major League Baseball team. This is the Toledo Blue Stockings, which is a fantastic name for a team. And like I said, Major League Ball Club. And so you might be wondering, there's someone here who doesn't look like they'd be on a Major League Ball Club prior to 1947. This guy right here. We have a man of color playing Major League Baseball. Wasn't Jackie Robinson the one that broke the color barrier? So what's the deal, right? And so the gentleman there, his name is Moses Fleetwood Walker, which is also a fantastic baseball name. And as far as we know, he's the first black man to play Major League Baseball. There is one other gentleman who's purported to have been first, but we can all agree that Moses Fleetwood Walker meets the criteria, whereas the other gentleman we cannot. So, as far as we know, he's the first Major League person of color, which is pretty cool. So then what's the deal with that whole 1947 thing? Well, just like the rest of the United States, right after the Civil War, baseball was trying to kind of find itself, as American society was. We had the social structure of the nation really was kind of trying to figure itself out. It's in a period of flux. Men of color being elected to Congress from states like Mississippi, things that some people would think was incredible hearing it today for the first time. But as we're trying to figure this all out, integration was happening. And then we start to see the rise of segregationist movements, and we start to see the rise of Jim Crow laws and groups like the Ku Klux Klan. And with all that, it makes its way into baseball. So in 1887, the International League, which, since this is a New York organization, Craftsmen Online, the International League is still around today. It's the league that the Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, all those minor league teams are part of that league today. And in 1887, it was the most integrated league in baseball. And they created what's called the Gentleman's Agreement. Now, many of you probably know Gentleman's Agreement is one where you don't really write it down, you just kind of shake hands and say, it's done. And so that Gentleman's Agreement was that they would not renew the contracts of any black ball players. So a bunch of men who were playing professional baseball were no longer allowed to play. And like I said, this did definitely reflect the Jim Crow laws and pro-segregationist sentiments at the time. And this was in 1887. So from 1887 until 1920, we see men who were barred from the major leagues and the semi-affiliated at the time minor leagues, barnstorming, playing baseball, much like how the Harlem Globetrotters would. They'd roll into town, find a local group to play, charge admission at the gate, split the tickets, and then head on to the next place to play. Not necessarily the best business model, but it's what they could do to play professionally. And then in 1920, at the YMCA in Kansas City, Missouri, the Negro National League was formed. And that created the first of what would eventually become the Negro Leagues, which just became recognized, their records as part of Major League Records, which is pretty cool. So from 1920 to 1946, we see segregation and the Negro Leagues. Sorry, we see this Negro Leagues operating at a professional major league level, and we see the major leagues operating at their own major league level. And so you see the two gentlemen here. We've got Larry Doby of the Cleveland Indians, who integrated the American League on the left, and we've got Jackie Robinson on the right, who integrated in 1947 as well for the National League and Major League as a whole. So they both did it the same year. Almost everyone's heard of Robinson. Not as many have heard of Doby, which is a shame because he did the same thing Robinson did the same year, and a lot of the cities did not overlap. Anyway, so they ended segregated play in both leagues the same year. Interestingly, the Red Sox were the last team to integrate in 1959, despite giving Robinson a tryout prior to him signing with the Dodgers organization. So they could have been the first, but they actually became the last. Unfortunately, the Negro National League and the Negro American League were just decimated once the floodgates opened and players left their contracts with the Negro Leagues for the major leagues. I can't blame the players. The owners certainly were trying to get their fair share as well. And actually, Doby came from the Newark Eagles, home of the only female Hall of Famer, owner Effa Manley. And the Newark Eagles really were one of the hardest hit teams. A lot of the top first wave of black ball players to integrate came from the Newark Eagles. Campanella is one of the other ones that's jumping in my head real at the top of my head, but so did Doby here. So a lot of their top players were gone within the first season. And that's why the Negro National League collapsed in 1949. Their top talent just got taken to the major leagues. The Negro American League held on a bit longer. You see I have an asterisk there next to 1960. We love asterisks in baseball, don't we? And so 1960, I put the asterisk there because yes, the league still existed until 1960, and Hank Aaron did in fact get his professional start in the Negro Leagues. He played for the Indianapolis Clowns, and unfortunately, Major League Baseball isn't counting his records because they cut off before he got in. Otherwise, he would be the home run king again. Just throwing that out there. But it stopped being a major league quality league right about 1949, 1950. So that is why the asterisk is there. While it still was around, it was not a major league quality. Kind of like the ABA, still around, but it's not nearly as good as it was back in the pre-merger with the NBA. So let's talk a little bit about the guy who signed Jackie Robinson, Brother Branch Rickey. One who knows why he was motivated. Some say he had really nice altruistic views as to why he wanted to integrate. Some say it was strictly because of money. Honestly, it doesn't really matter. The fact is he's the guy who signed Jackie Robinson, and that's where the story ends. If you really want to get into the nitty-gritty of it, that's fine, but not today. The guy who signed Jackie Robinson and created the farm system that we're familiar with, also a Freemason. So let's talk about our Masonic segregation that we've had. And I don't think I didn't update a slide on here that I should have updated. So that's good news, very good news. Real quick, all United States plus the District of Columbia have a 3 or 4 letter Grand Lodge. There's some of one of these 3 or some other combination, but F and AM, which is New York, AF and AM, like our neighbors to the east in Massachusetts, and FAAM is what it is in DC, but you'll see some combination of those, right? Free and accepted Masons, ancient free and accepted Masons, right? And then as of the creation of this slide, almost all standard US Grand Lodges recognize each other. Tennessee, I know, has a few grand jurisdictions that do not recognize them at the moment because they do not allow gay members. So that is part of that. So not all US, and there's a couple others that are also kind of on that list where not all recognize them. There's also other clandestine or non-regular Grand Lodges which are not recognized. Now, non-regular and clandestine are not the same term. Just know that they are not the same term. Non-regular means they don't follow the old charges. While clandestine means that it's just a group that just kind of said, all right, we're going to be Masons today, and form their own group. Grand Lodge Innate, who wants to come join, right? Also, you didn't hear that. I don't want to get kicked out. So, and then you'll see Prince Hall Grand Lodges, recognized by most but not all. What's really cool about Prince Hall Grand Lodges is that they're traditionally African American jurisdictions. Prince Hall Grand Lodges are recognized by the UGLE, and the United Grand Lodge of England is usually, if they recognize you, most everyone else does. And it's named after Revolutionary era African-American Freemason Prince Hall, who The Atlantic just recognized as the forgotten founding father. So that's pretty cool that he's getting some recognition for his role in the revolution. And then most states have or share Prince Hall Grand Lodge. I say share because unlike the 3- and 4-letter Grand Lodges, I know the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Colorado and the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Utah is actually the same grand jurisdiction. So it's pretty cool if they share. And I need to update this. I do. So Tennessee should actually be blue now. Just this past week, Tennessee has accepted recognition with their Prince Hall affiliate. So everyone that's blue, it recognizes their Prince Hall affiliate, and usually all the others, at least as long as their 3- or 4-letter recognizes. So let's talk New York for a second. New York Prince Hall and New York FNAM recognize each other. We have co-visitation. We can do whatever we want. Texas also has the same. So if Texas recognizes their Prince Hall, then generally speaking, New York would recognize Prince Hall of Texas. However, you'll notice Louisiana is not blue. So they do not recognize their Prince Hall. So most Grand Lodges will not recognize Prince Hall out of Louisiana until Louisiana does. Again, I'm speaking in broad generalities. Every Grand Lodge has their own rules. And I actually don't know what New York's is, but if anyone knows and wants to type it in, feel free to type it in the chat. But yeah, so making some progress. I've filled in quite a few squares, or quite a few states since I created this slide, which is, I think, a good thing. Anyway, what is Prince Hall Freemasonry? How did it get started? What's its whole deal? So here's the history of African Lodge, which eventually became Prince Hall. All right, so 15 Black men were rejected membership by Boston St. John's Lodge. These men were initiated as members of a military lodge, meaning it was attached to a military unit, and that military unit was under the Grand Lodge of Ireland. It was lodge number 441. After the military unit left, African Lodge was established by the Grand Lodge of England, and they were allowed to perform in a limited capacity and then eventually full. Well, at least that's the story that we're told, because you know what? It just like the rest of this, it's not true. That's the story. So what's the real history? And thankfully, Landmarks of Our Fathers by Brother John Hairston came out a couple years ago, edited actually by the senior, or geez, is he senior Grand Warden or junior Grand Warden? Oscar Allen. Anyway, Oscar Allen, most of you here know him. He is the the editor of the book. And Brother Hairston actually goes through the Grand Lodge records of Scotland, Ireland, and England, finds the original documents, prints the facsimiles in the end of the book so you can see for yourself. And let me tell you, it's quite controversial when it came out a couple of years ago. But through his research, he's found out that this story, completely wrong. This is the truth. A group of Black men were initiated clandestinely by John Batt. So John Batt decided he's just going to start making men Masons and taking their money, and congratulations, you're a Mason, and then leave. So pretty common in the 17th and 17 and 1800s, actually. Upon recognizing they'd been made clandestine, they petitioned the Grand Lodge of England. Now, think back to when you joined Freemasonry, assuming you're a Mason. How would you know that you joined a legitimate a legitimate lodge? You wouldn't, right? It wasn't until you started getting more into Freemasonry that you realized that there's part of this greater Grand Lodge, which is recognized by other Grand Lodges. So if you joined one clandestinely or became a Mason clandestinely, you wouldn't probably know. And that's exactly what happened to these men. So upon realizing they'd been duped, they petitioned the Grand Lodge of England, and they eventually did grant them recognition. And it really was slow at first, but then it did start to pick up steam. And really by the 1980s, 1990s, we start to see fairly widespread recognition throughout Europe and through a decent chunk of the United States. And then today, as you can see, it's still continuing on. And like I said, there at the bottom is the title of the book, Landmarks of Our Fathers. And Brother Hairston really does challenge the history of Prince Hall Freemasonry. So real quick, focus on the center section here. Don't worry so much about the outside of this Venn diagram, but baseball and masonry both were segregated based on skin color. They eventually the recognition of the segregated branch was considered to be equal to the original. So both Major League Baseball and the Negro Leagues are viewed as equal. And there's no doubt that Negro Leagues baseball was just as good as Major League Baseball during its heyday. And Prince Hall Freemasonry is recognized as being just as legitimate as the rest of mainstream Freemasonry. And today both are integrated. I'm sure all of you can think of someone quickly who is white that's a member of a Prince Hall Grand Lodge or vice versa. So there's, generally speaking, no segregation in Masonry or baseball today. Let's talk a little bit about the symbolism and similarities of the two. And I'll admit some of these may seem like a stretch, but I think if you really dive into the meaning of the symbols and look at what it means on a baseball field, you might actually see there's some nice similarities between the two. So first off, we definitely have ritualism and ceremony to both. Tomorrow's opening day. And there's all sorts of pomp and circumstance around opening day, isn't there? More so than the usual game. But there's always the first pitch. And it seems like there's multiple first pitches at every game now, right? Did you ever notice that? There's a first pitch, and like 10 minutes later, there's another first pitch. So fascinating how that works. We can't count to two. But also, I played baseball for a long time, even as an umpire. When I'd run out if I was the field ump, when I ran out onto the field, I would make sure to kind of jump or kick my heel up to make sure I wouldn't touch the foul line. Right? There's all sorts of yeah. I see a couple heads nodding. Yeah, you don't touch the foul line. All sorts of ritualism to baseball. And here we see. I'm a Mets fan, by the way. I should start off with that. So here you see 50 Cent throwing out arguably the worst first pitch of all time. It actually leaves the screen. It's so bad. And in Freemasonry, we also have our ritualism. Every meeting is opened in a formal, hopefully identical way. We hope it's identical to the time before. And we close the same way. If you go to Yankee Stadium and the Yankees win, you're going to hear Frank Sinatra singing New York, New York, right? And if they lose, you're still going to hear New York, New York, but it's not going to be Frank Sinatra singing it to you. It's going to be someone else singing it. It used to be silence, but I think the actual game are fans leaving angry and in silence. So now you hear someone else. It varies from game to game. The Mets, if the Mets win, again, the songs have changed, but since 2015, it's been pretty steady with Back in a New York Groove is usually what you'll hear if the Mets win. If you go to Fenway in the, I think it's the top of the seventh, top of the sixth, top of the seventh, you're going to hear Sweet Caroline, right? That is always played at that time. So it definitely has its ritualism in baseball. We definitely have it in Freemasonry as well. Sorry, I'm just trying to mess with my settings here real quick. I apologize. I can see there's messages coming up in the chat, and I can't quite get the chat button. There we go. All right. All right. So circumambulation. All right. First thing, this was brought to me the other day. So all the Freemasons here, we're always told we circumambulate, but we don't. We don't circumambulate. It's more like a quadambulate, right? We don't move in circles, right? So, so I was taught to square my corners. So that's exactly what's happening here, though, isn't it? Bugs Bunny here, looking like he's playing for a team that needs a better pitcher. But you see they're moving, they're circumambulating. Well, technically quadambulating, I suppose. But they're moving around the baseball diamond, just like we would have similar movements in a Masonic lodge. Now, the two pillars is one of my favorite symbols, to be honest with you, in all Freemasonry. Actually, I have an entire hour-long presentation just on the pomegranate, which has literally one line in New York Masonic ritual. And that's with the two pillars. So with that, the two pillars really do have exactly the same symbolism, right? They denote being within and being without, within its most simple form interpretation of the symbol. When you're within those pillars, you are inside of the temple. When you are outside, you're outside of the temple. And the foul poles do the exact same thing. The difference between a fair ball and a foul depends on if it's inside or outside, or right on the line of the extension of those poles. And so I really, really appreciate the fact that the same symbol that I really care about in Masonry does have an equivalent in the game that I love so much. The 4 points are stations. Now, in Blue Lodge, we don't necessarily use all 4 cardinal stations as much as maybe some other Masonic bodies do. But we certainly hear all 4 cardinal directions being used fairly regularly. Same thing with a baseball diamond. If you've ever played on a diamond that's not structured correctly, you know it. I used to umpire at a youth camp not too far from here, up in the Cooperstown area, and one of the fields was set up so that it was 4 back-to-back-to-back, so home plate kind of right in the same point and all branching out. But for about a month straight, you were hoping for clouds, because if the sun was out right as it was setting, you'd have to have about an hour-long sun delay, because the sun would set directly behind the pitcher. And nothing's better than 12-year-olds who can throw like 70 miles an hour that are about 45 feet away from home plate, and you can't see the ball coming. So not only for a safety issue, but as an umpire, you can't see it, so you can't call it. So yeah, the cardinal directions are extremely important to both. And then this one, some people initially gave me some trouble with this. I'm like, no, think about it though. It really is what this is a great connection, right? So in Masonry, you begin as a rough ashlar, right? And as you work your way through the degrees, as you work your way through the teachings of those, you're supposed to become a more perfect ashlar, right? Our goal is to become the perfect stone, right? Which is an unattainable, we all know, but that's the goal, right? And baseball really is the same thing. You start at home, you advance through the bases, and you return back to where you started at a better place because you just scored a run. And so if you've ever been one of those people who is a small ball guy, I'm a National League guy, I told you, and I love small ball. So I really think there's a strong connection between advancing through the degrees, advancing through the bases, and making yourself better. So to summarize, both have their legendary origins and their true origins are unknown. Record keeping abysmal in both, just throwing that out there. Can you tell I have a history background? Both have a shared history. Focus solely on the integration segregation aspect, but there's much more to it as far as if you look at the key periods of popularity. Baseball's golden era really is 1947 to 1968. And if you look at Masonic membership numbers, it peaked in, I think, 1960, 1961. So really those do match up as well. And you can keep going into similarities in their shared history. Deeper connections and symbolism. Just talked about those. Also, one thing I didn't mention here in the presentation, but it's totally accurate, is the impact on American culture. Even if you just look at idioms, idiomatic expressions like getting a square deal, meeting someone on the level, giving someone the third degree. That came out of left field. He was off base, right? Baseball and Freemasonry have given tons of idioms to the American English language. And that's something that definitely has to be considered as well. And if you like Masonic sports connections, these two books might be of interest to you. The one on the left, Forge on Ice, Robert A. Goodman, and actually he's supposed to be a speaker at Cooperstown Masonicon coming up in October. So hear him speak about the connections between Freemasonry and hockey. 3 periods, 3 degrees. I mean, it's pretty simple just from the start. But also the book on the right, it's hard to read the title. It is very difficult to find. I know of only 2 places where I know for a fact that it exists. I believe we have one in Manhattan at the library, but don't quote me on that one. I know there's one at the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museums Library, and I know that the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts in their library has 2. Other than that, I'm not aware of where you can find a copy. I haven't been able to find one for purchase anywhere. Pretty limited run, but it's called The Brothers of the Diamond, and that is also where I was able to pull 1 or 2 Masonic Masons that I was not, or Masonic Hall of Famers that I wasn't familiar with. So with all of that, thank you.
Brother Nate, thank you so very much for the wonderful program presentation. I hope that everyone enjoyed it. Be safe, everyone. It was great just seeing your faces or your names. God bless you all, my brothers. Be safe, be well. Until next time.